All right, we're back once again on Capitol Tonight. There will likely be a Democratic primary in the 21st Congressional District next year, with 2 candidates officially declared so far and others considering a run. But Patrick Nelson was the first to announce all the way back in February. He was most recently a staffer for Assemblyman Phil Steck, and he joins me now to talk about why he's turning his attention to Congress. Patrick, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure being here, Nick.
So tell me a little bit about why you have decided to run for this congressional seat.
Well, we think about the status in which we find ourselves as a state, as a nation. The stakes are incredibly high. We are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change, and the last generation with the ability to do something about it. We stand in the middle of a healthcare crisis where the United States is coming to grips with the idea that we can't treat healthcare like a normal market, and that we need to ensure that every one of our neighbors and friends and family have access to healthcare as a right, not just for the benefit of them, but for the benefit of everyone, because health is a communal situation, right? If you're sick right now, I have a tendency to get sick. And there's also a national security impetus there. I trained as a biochemist at RPI, and the prospect of bioterrorism is something that I am concerned about. And we need a universal healthcare system to ensure that people who may become victim to bioterrorism can get to a doctor quickly and do not have a financial disincentive to going to see a doctor. So we have a lot of situations to deal with. We have artificial intelligence and automation, with the impacts that that has on our economy and the displacement of jobs. Oxford University came out with a study recently that suggested that up to 47% of American jobs could be subject to automation within the next 2 decades. Now, they could be off by a factor of 400%, and it could still be devastating for the economy. 10% unemployment is depression. So we need to have a sober adult conversation about the real issues and the underpinnings that are happening right now in society, and come forward with real solutions to real problems and get away from the partisan political bickering where we can't even agree on what reality is.
Okay, so let's break a couple of those issues down. First of all, on the issue of health care, do you support, say, a single-payer system, a so-called Medicaid or Medicare for All program?
So when I worked in the Assembly, I worked for a long-time co-sponsor, Assemblymember Phil Steck. I was privileged to work in his office, and I tell you, it's fantastic to work for someone that gives you an opportunity to do your own thing as well. That's not always the case, so I'm forever thankful for that. So Phil was a long-time co-sponsor of the New York Health Act. I share his support for that, and I would also commit to being a co-sponsor of HR 676 in the House, which has improved and expanded Medicare for All. So yes, I absolutely do support the move to an improved Medicare for All system for the United States so that we can stop paying the highest prices for prescription drugs and for health care. We pay more taxpayer money in this country for health care than most other nations pay for their entire system. $4,600 comes out of the coffers of taxpayer money every year per person. Mind you, we're not covering everybody. So that's not $4,600 per person covered, it's $4,600 per person as if we covered everybody. France spends $4,400 for their entire system, do cover everyone, and have better healthcare outcomes and live 2 years longer than we do. The American people are getting ripped off on our healthcare, and it's because we're still committed to this free market ideology towards healthcare. Now, I love the free market. You know, Ford, Chevy, Coke, Pepsi, where there's competition and where the consumer is price conscious, you know, free market systems can control price. But in the case of healthcare, it comes down to this. To what level do I have to lower the cost of a quadruple bypass where you'll get one tomorrow?
I do want to ask you also about some veterans issues as well.
Absolutely.
Obviously, that's a major issue in the 21st Congressional District. The member of Congress who you would like to replace, Elise Stefanik, is on the Armed Services Committee. She has made Fort Drum, obviously, a major part of her time in office as well. How would you handle veterans issues, and what would you like to try to tackle in terms of veterans issues if elected to Congress?
Well, it does come back to healthcare. Again, this is one of these very large issues that comes together because we don't have a VA health facility in the 21st District. Now think about that. It's the largest district in the state of New York, over 16,000 square miles. There are more veterans in the 21st Congressional District than any other congressional district in the state, and yet we don't have a VA hospital. You know, veterans in this district are driving 3 hours, 2.5 hours to Albany or to Syracuse to use the health care that we as taxpayers provide for them as for their service, you know, keeping us free and safe. So that's one issue. Having not served myself, I've spent a lot of time listening to veterans throughout the district, and my understanding is that they want someone that truly gets it. And so I'm doing everything within my power to get it. And that's understanding that it's not just veterans issues as a monolith. You know, you have issues that concern officers, that concern enlisted members, men and women, older veterans and younger veterans. So it's not something where there's a one-size-fits-all solution, and we need to ensure that we are keeping up our responsibility as citizens for these people who have put their lives on the line for us.
What has Elise Stefanik done that's fallen short in your estimation when it comes to veterans issues?
Well, I mean, I just talked about it, I think, a minute ago. We haven't seen her advocating for a VA health clinic or a VA hospital, full-service VA hospital in the 21st Congressional District. That's something that we need. I think it's imperative with the population of veterans that we have in that area and the vastness of it to have something that's closer for more people.
I do want to also ask you, kind of in the realm of politics, not so much policy, but support from Governor Andrew Cuomo, who has tried to make an effort in terms of flipping congressional seats that are held by Republicans to the Democratic column. He is working actively to do that. Elise Stefanik is one of the seats that he is targeting, mainly because of health care. So would you accept the endorsement of Governor Cuomo?
I would certainly accept the endorsement of the governor, and I'm excited to see that the state party is getting behind flipping these congressional seats. I do hope that we're not diverting attention away from reuniting Democrats in the state Senate so that we can pass the New York Health Act. And I do not want to see us repeat the mistakes that we've made in the past as a party, overlooking the odd years. You know, the focus of the state party right now should be winning supervisor seats and winning town council seats, in preventing a constitutional convention from coming and costing the state $50 million.
You're against the con.
I am against the constitutional convention. There's too much at stake, not to mention the possibility for outside money to influence. And it's 3 additional races per state Senate district where there won't be a lot of attention. I don't think all the candidates for delegates, for example, will have an opportunity to come on this show. And that allows outside money to have an overarching interest in terms of the election of those delegates. Not to mention the people knocking doors, and we have to flip a house. We have to take back the state Senate. If we have to elect a Democratic convention delegation, that's going to take a lot of resources.
Should Faso Collins be allowed to move forward, even if it is kind of in a separate piece of legislation, in a separate bill? This is shifting Medicaid from the county governments onto the state.
So I think the fundamental idea that we need to get Medicaid to the state away from the county is a good one. That's why we need to pass the New York Health Act in New York that would do just that. However, this shouldn't be something that's done by a big government mandate coming from Washington, D.C., telling the state how to administrate its health care. It's interesting that this is coming from the Republican Party that's all against unfunded mandates, and then here's the king of unfunded mandates in the Faso Collins Amendment.
So should the state, though, in the main, kind of all this stripped away right now, should the state be taking on the burden of Medicaid from the county?
Yes, by passing the New York Health Act, which allows us to pull in Medicaid money, Medicare money, and create a progressive taxation system that's going to save money for 98% of New Yorkers. I think the estimates were something like $45 billion in the first year. Again, through consolidation of services, through streamlining of paperwork. I think that's something that should be done. Now, obviously, I'm a candidate for federal office. My position on that is I would be an advocate for the waivers that would be necessary to implement the New York Health Act.
I know you're a candidate for federal office, but on another state issue, especially with Governor Cuomo involved for a congressional district like in the North Country, obviously a major issue for a lot of folks is the SAFE Act. It's something that Congressman Bill Owens, the last Democrat to represent that area, had said that he was opposed to. How do you feel about the SAFE Act?
I think the SAFE Act is what happens when establishment politics get together and we focus on headlines rather than good policy. I'll leave it at this, that the SAFE Act bans the AR-15, yet allows the Ruger Mini-22. Now, these are effectively the same rifle with the same ammunition, the same capacity to do harm. If we're to be regulating firearms, I think we should agree it should be based upon their capacity to do harm, not one that looks scary and the other one that doesn't. I think the folks that would advocate for gun control do a disservice to themselves by advocating for the New York SAFE Act. I would not support that.
So in Congress, would you support a bill that, say, would try to enhance background checks?
Well, I think there are some common sense solutions that we have here. I think universal background checks, I don't think that that's going to infringe on anybody's Second Amendment rights. That's not about harm or removing the rights from law-abiding gun owners. It's just assuring that gun owners are indeed law-abiding. And I think that we can come to a consensus that once we reform, and this is important, we reform the due process provisions of the terrorist watch list to ensure that people have an opportunity to appeal, because sometimes the wrong person winds up on there.
Folks are on the no-fly list. And
my high school history teacher accidentally wound up on there because he had the same name as a member of, I think it was the IRA. And we were on a senior trip, and we actually get held up in Albany Airport for a little while because of that. So we need to have a notice provision. But once we get the due process fixed within the terrorist watch list, I would support no fly, no buy, saying that if you're on the terrorist watch list, you shouldn't be buying firearms in the United States.
Okay, we will have to leave it at that, unfortunately, but I want to thank you very much for coming in.
Nick, pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that is all the time we have for this evening's show, but please join us again tomorrow night at 8. We will be hearing more about the healthcare debate from SEIU. Plus, Albany law professor Ray Becerra will be discussing the issues of when and how a state can sue the federal government, something New York has been threatening lately. And for news as it breaks, be sure to check out our blog, State of Politics. You can find it at nystateofpolitics.com. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great night.